Good morning. The Conejo Valley Unified School District Board of Education Special Board Meeting of September 30th, 2025 will please come to order. Pursuant to the Ralph M. Brown Act, this is a meeting of the Board of Education in public, and only items on the agenda will be discussed this morning. You are invited to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're at item 1C, approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
President Powell,
Yes, Trustee Goldberg.
I move the agenda as submitted.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on this? Seeing none, we'll vote. Trustee Kearns?
Yes.
Trustee Goldberg?
Yes.
Trustee Gill?
Yes.
Trustee Gorbach?
Yes.
Trustee Sylvester?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Motion carries 5-0 with a preferential yes vote from Trustee Kearns. We are at item 1D, and we are at public comments, which are limited to special board meeting agenda items only. Do we have any public comments? We do not have any public comments. Therefore, we will move on to section 2, which is our study session, where we are exploring some issues related to potential feasibility and whether we would want to potentially move forward on a new bond measure, putting it on the ballot. So we are at 2A, and I will turn it over to Dr. Hayek for our first presentation.
Thank you. Good morning. So before we look forward, maybe we take a few moments and look back. So we'll give you an update of where we are with Measure I. As you know, Measure I was approved in 2014. It was a $197 million total bond, but only $146 million of that 197 went toward capital projects. We're proud of how Measure I has been handled. We think there's a very positive reputation for the district and on how we handled it, the projects, how we financed it, the tax rate, et cetera. So I want to acknowledge our planning and construction staff who is here. Tim McCabe's our director of planning and construction. Debbie Hanna's our planning specialist. Ken Thomas, our project manager. And our construction supervisor is Rick Blake, who's behind the wall over here. And Mike Stanford, who's probably out at he's on vacation. So small but mighty staff. One thing just to bring back into your thought process here and looking at Measure I, looking at Measure R before, the district spent over the course of 2001 to like 2014, $9 million in outside construction management costs. With Measure I, starting in 2016-17, we went completely in-house for construction management, and it's all been done by this group of 5 very talented but mighty individuals here. So it saved us quite a bit of money, which means that it was more money, which means more projects were completed. As far as finances, where we are with Measure I, you can see we're pretty much expended on, these are the elementary schools. You have Glenwood, Lang Ranch, and Maple have the most money left. Westlake Hills and then Madronia have a little bit left. There are projects slated for this year and next for all these schools, and will be 100% expended on everything shortly. Middle and high schools, similar scenario. Newbury Park High School is the one that has the most money available, but we have a large project going on. We're actually should be getting our final approvals on October 2nd, and then we'll move full speed ahead with the upgrading of the science labs and some other work on campus at that site. So Newbury is going to look like the other schools very shortly. Excuse me. Through the end of this year and continuing into next year by the time we finish. There are small amounts left at Thousand Oaks High School and Westlake High School and Conejo Valley High School. We did reposition some of the funds, as you know, at a meeting last month to redo the turf and tracks at the 3 high schools. and those are expected to be started in December and completed by no later than the end of February. The other sites that had Measure I allocations, Horizon Hills is fully expended. Meadows, which is leased to a charter school, has about 10%, 16% left. Park Oaks is where we house our central kitchen. We're in the process of moving that central kitchen to a new location. So we're going to use some of these funds to restore the site and make some improvements to so we don't leave the site unattended. And then Triumfo, which is the former site that was leased to a private school, is now currently leased to a new tenant who takes over October 1st. And the remaining funds for Triumfo were the dollars that were repositioned for the turf and tracks at the 3 high schools. University is just about finished. And then adult education, we have quite a bit left in adult ed, but we have some big plans moving forward with potential expansion of CTE programs and trade learning programs for our adults in the community and potential bridges for our students as well. So just looking back, we do have some highlights going back to 2016. We're all familiar with this. This is our, we've received the awards on the design and on this project. Tim and his crew did a really great job of the planning, designing, and executing this entire project. It is something that's very visible from the street, and we've gotten a lot of positive review and feedback on the facility itself. Thousand Oaks Library underwent a complete renovation. We redid the pool at Newbury Park High School. All the HVAC systems at Thousand Oaks High School were redone in 2018. We put in a new softball field for a girls softball field in 2019 at Newbury Park High School, which I believe used to share the field next door. Los Cerritos got a exterior modernization, which we still get positive compliments to this day about the curb appeal, if you will. Conejo Academy, same thing. The exterior modernization has dramatically improved the look of that school. Ladera Stars, similar, same thing in 2018. Acacia received the same thing. Weathersfield, similar in 2019. And you see the marquee here. One of the things we did with Measure I was we branded each of the schools with the district logo on these marquees that are consistent throughout the city at our school sites. This is the inside of the Weathersfield Library, which was just completed in 2025. You may remember the Conejo Valley High School relocation in 2017. It's been quite a while, but that was a Measure I project that moved them into this high school here. Kalina received its modernization. We did the science labs to help support the science programs and the feeding into the high schools. This was back in 2023. We also made some safety improvements to the entrance and exit in the parking lot, as you could see in the picture on the lower left. Redwood, this was just recently completed in 2024. We did a science lab and also did the outside area behind the cafeteria, and you could see it there on the top right. Provided some much needed shade and gave them a location to have some outdoor activities and events. Sequoia modernization, same thing, science labs and some classroom upgrades. Thousand Oaks High School, we updated all the science labs, which is the same thing that we're doing at Newbury Park High School. And then on the top right, you see the anatomoge table, right? That we're still, I think, one of only 2 schools in Southern California that have one of those. It's pretty fascinating if you haven't seen it. Century Academy received its modernization in 2022, and there you see the exterior of the school and also the marquee that is consistent throughout the district. Outdoor learning areas where we've done at a few different schools. This is Aspen, completed in 2023. Cypress, also in 2023. Walnut, their outside modernization in 2024, and the outside playground. Westlake Elementary, new student pavilion with some shade sails. If you recall, this used to be grass and dirt in the middle, and now it's a completely useful area. University Learning Center houses our BME preschool, our child care program. Also, the NPR is very heavily used for meetings and events for internal and external groups. And on the bottom, you see the new NPR, which is dramatically improved and looks very, very modern. So we did start Newberry. These are the locker rooms. You see the islands in the middle. We've started to remove the locker rooms. That's part of the project that's going on now and should be completed by 2026. And playgrounds, which seem to be a favorite for many of us. You can see we did playgrounds at a number of our elementary campuses. This is Ladera, Acacia, Glenwood, Maple. This is the beloved Tyke Track at University. So for 25, 26, these are the major projects we have. Buildings D, E in the locker rooms, which is underway at Newbury Park High School. We'll continue the upgrades at Kalina. We're doing the music room, central kitchen relocation, which I mentioned earlier. Glenwood NPR is going to receive an upgrade and some site work. The 3 football field, turf, and track replacements. The HVAC at Maple Elementary School, and we're doing some HVAC replacements at Lang Ranch. HVAC also at Walnut as well. So there's about $15 million of current 25 projects. We did really take an initiative and made a really proactive informational site on Measure I. Anything and everything you can ask for about Measure I is here. All the financial reports, presentations, our bond oversight committee, meetings, minutes, agendas. We have the master plans, the site surveys that were done in 2016. Everything is on there, and there's also a question and answer section. There's a copy of the ballot language and also a links to Exhibit B and a project summary sheet from dating back to 2014. So there's a whole host of information here, and it's all organized by school as well. So if you're interested in a particular school, it's organized extremely well. So that was in 2014. We're positioned pretty well to finish out Measure I in the next, I'd say 24 to 28 months. And if you have any questions on any of this, happy to answer them. Our planning team is here also if you have any specific questions, like what's the speed limit around the Tyke Track. And
Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments? And the tech funds, I guess, just to put that out there, those will be still in use for until about 2037?
yeah, keeping with our fiscal conservative view on and actions on Measure I, about 3 years ago when interest rates were very, very, very low and haven't been that low since, what we did was we sold our taxable bonds. Typically, you would sell non-taxable bonds for a public entity, and they would have a higher interest rate. So the differential between taxable and non-taxable was very small. So, but when you sell non-taxable bonds, you have a 3-year window to spend those funds. When we issue taxable bonds, there's no time limit on those taxable bonds. So we sold the entire lot of the technology endowment, and that's going to carry us through till 2034. So we have those funds. We don't have to reissue any additional funds, and I don't think we're going to see interest rates that low for quite a while. So that was a pretty good move on us. And we did maintain those as 15-year bonds, as we've done consistently through Measure I. All the bonds that we sold were all 15 years, and even on the refinance, we didn't extend the payoff time back to we kept the original 15-year payoffs. We should be done paying off Measure I in 2037, I believe.
Thank you. I know there are lots of good things to tell about the Measure I process, and I think that there's some plans in the works to be putting out that information to our community more visibly as we move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Great. No more comments? None. Okay. So let's go on to 2B, which is also Dr. Hayek, and I believe we have 3 presentations under this agenda item.
Yeah, the first one is, as we've been going through Measure I, we know that we don't have unlimited funds. So as we've been working through projects, we've been noting areas of need and things that we want to address at some point in the future, should funds become available. So the list that's titled Infrastructure Needs is a list that's been put together and ongoing for the last couple of years. I know the board had asked back in May to see this document. We did present it back in May, and it's here for reference, so you can see by school site where the main facility needs are moving forward, and an estimate of cost, keeping in mind that it does include some cost escalation, but we don't know what costs will eventually be like whenever the time comes to do those projects. The next presentation is Jin. Kim is our financial advisor. He's with Bank of America Securities. He's going to go through some of the financial background on Measure I. He also was here back in 2014 when we were going through this. So he's going to give you some updated financial information and some scenarios as to if the board does decide to go out for a bond, what it looks like and what our taxing capabilities and authorities are, and some other details, and he can answer any questions that you have.
Sure. Thank you for that, Dr. Hayek. Good morning, President Powell, trustees. Thank you for inviting me here this morning. I understand that the district is now considering a potential exploration of a potential bond in the upcoming election cycle. So I thought it might be helpful for us to take a moment to review what type of general obligation bonds are available to a school district like ourselves. And then what I thought we could also do is do a quick cursory review about some of the bond parameters about Measure I, which was very successful. I know Dr. Hayek spent a few minutes talking about the projects that were completed, but I thought we could also look into some of the financial successes related to that. And then maybe we can spend a few minutes and go over some of what I like to call components or ingredients in which the district should consider as it continues to explore the possibility of a bond. So with that said, just a quick overview about the types of bonds that are available to school districts. Essentially, there are two types of general obligation bonds which are available to districts like us. One under Proposition 46, which was our first Measure R, and then another one under Proposition 39, which is the more recent Measure I. The most simplistic comparison of these two is that Proposition 46 requires a 2/3 approval by the community members, whereas Proposition 39 requires a 55%. However, with the lower threshold approval rate comes with some transparency and accountability features associated with it. So unlike Proposition 46 or Measure R, we didn't need a Citizens Bond Oversight Committee. We didn't have a legal maximum tax rate. However, under Measure I, we were required to have a Citizens Bond Oversight Committee, and we were required to do an annual audit of how the bond proceeds were being spent, and we were also subject to a maximum tax rate on our property taxes. For Proposition 39 and for a district like ours, that's $60 per $100,000 of assessed valuation. So if you're wondering, for a typical homeowner within our district, the taxable value, not the market value, is about $700,000. So what I would just simply do is multiply whatever our tax rate on the bonds are and just multiply that by 7, and you'll get a sense for what the typical community member is paying on our Measure I bonds. So that's the key difference between the two. It's a lower passing threshold in terms of the community by under Proposition 39. However, it does have some transparency and accountability features built into it for the benefit and protection of the community. So those are the two types. Now, I'd like to spend a few minutes and just review Measure I. So Measure I and Measure S, both bonds. So Measure R and Measure I. These are the 75-word ballot languages associated with our two bond measures. Measure R on the left, Measure I on the right. I've highlighted some of the fonts or texts in red. And the reason why I did that is those are the projects that were shared with the voters in the ballot box. Now, this isn't the comprehensive project list. The resolution calling for the election has a comprehensive project list, but these were some of the highlights of the projects that the districts wanted to address with each of these bond measures. Now, you might be wondering, why did I just highlight the projects in red? Because those are the text within the ballot language, which is within your control to edit, if you will. You can make updates and changes to these texts as suggested by what the district may do in a poll, because the polling will tell us what sort of the projects the community is willing to get behind the district on and what projects they're willing to support. So we want to highlight those projects in the 75-word ballot language. The text in black, those are legally required text, and we don't really have a say in how we edit that. Now, since the passage of Measure I, and we'll go through this in a little bit more detail later, there was a new law that was put into place called AB 195. Now, in addition to the bond amount, we're now required to share with the voting public some financial statistics related to our bond measure, such as the estimated tax rate, as well as the repayment amount of the entire bond package. But I thought I'd share this with you because this is a great place to start the review about our old bonds. This is some statistical information about the two bond measures. Measure R passed, that should say November 3rd, 1998. That was passed in 1998. Measure I was passed in 2014. As you can see here, you see the different approval rates, 2/3 required under Measure R, 55% minimum required under Measure I, because they fall under two different propositions. And in the middle of the page, those are the bond draws that we've taken for both of those programs. It's very common practice for school districts to take multiple bond draws after a bond program is successfully approved by the board, because it's kind of like a letter of credit, if you will. Just as if when you take out a letter of credit on your home or line of credit, you may not draw all of that line of credit all at once. You may just draw upon it whenever you find the need to address any financial needs you might have. I thought what's most important on this slide are the bottom two data points. Measure R has been fully paid off. Measure I has about 11 years left to go. You know, I was looking through my files, and I noticed that when Measure I was put into place, we initially estimated that Measure I will be paid off in fiscal year 2038-39. So our actual results are 2 years better than what we had originally planned back in 2014. I thought I might share that with you. The tax rate, $27.10 for Measure I. As a unified school district, our legal maximum is $60. So we're much underneath our maximum tax rate, and we'll go over that a little bit more later. Our targeted tax rate to the voters was $32.70. So we're even below what we had originally targeted to the community back in 2014. So why don't we move on to the next slide? This is the projected tax rate of Measure I. Dr. Hayek mentioned that we have until 2037, and that's the projected tax rate until 2037. We're projected to stay underneath or below our targeted tax rate of $32.70. And just for illustrative purposes, I also put a maximum tax rate up there, 60. So we can theoretically go up to $60, but we're not projected to go anywhere near that until the repayment period. We shared this chart with you before. This is an updated version of the comparison of all the tax rates amongst the 19 school districts within the county. You'll see that we are second to the bottom. Santa Clara Elementary School District is the only school district in the county which hasn't passed a bond. However, they do have a high school district bond, which the community members within that elementary school district pays. And speaking of that, if you were to look at Somis Union School District, you know, $27.60 is just for the elementary school. The residents of that community also pay a high school district tax. So you almost have to add $27.60 plus the high school district tax. So we are far below probably what our nearest comparison would be Moore Park Unified, which has $51.30 tax rate. So I thought this is a valuable illustration of how we compare to some of our neighbors within the county. So this is a final slide on our past bond program. So these are some of the highlights. We have 11 years remaining in our repayment of Measure I. which again is 2 years shorter than what we had originally estimated to the community. Our tax rate is well below our targeted tax rate of $32.70. And the district has demonstrated fiscal stewardship by proactively refinancing old bonds. If you remember, we recently refinanced some of the old bonds under Measure I and passed down a savings of about $1.7 million to the community. So I thought this might be just a helpful information to remind ourselves as we're thinking about a potential new bond. So without further ado, let me share some information about a GO bond and what the district should consider. So this is a summary of the considerations that the district board, staff should think about as we are considering a bond or exploring the potential feasibility of a bond. That's the bond authorization amount, which is a total package of bond we would like to ask the community to support. The next is the phasing and timing of the individual bond draws, and that ties in with whatever facilities needs the district might have. The term of the individual bond issuance, that's the repayment period. Do we want a 25-year bond? Do we want a 15-year bond? Or do we want to do the standard 30-year bond? Those are some of the things that we should be thinking about as well. And then, of course, the projected tax rate. What do we think our community is willing to support? Do we want to go all the way to the $60, which is legally available to us? Or do we want to go something different? And I'll share some more information on that as we go through the slides here. And then lastly, the district's assessed valuation. That's important because we want to make sure that we utilize a reasonable assumption as to our projected growth in the future, so that our tax rates stay within what we may target or estimate. So starting with the first one, the bond authorization amount or the package. There are many information on here, but I'll focus your attention to two things. The two factors we need to consider are what the district's statutory bonding capacity is. This is a measurement of outstanding bonds on the books for the district. Just like many of us, when we're evaluating our personal finances, we don't want to over leverage ourselves and take out too much loan for our family hold to bear. So that's one consideration. The other consideration is your facilities needs. We want to make sure that your bond plan does what you're seeking to do and to add benefits to your community. And then the tax rate. The tax rate is extremely important here because depending on what the community's willingness to bear, that'll have an impact on the bond package amount. So those are some of the things that we should be thinking about. Now, the second ingredient that I like to talk about, Victor, the next slide, please. So we talked about the bonding capacity. So I want to draw your attention to the far right of this chart. This is a calculation which measures all of the outstanding bonds at this time for the district. This figure changes every year depending on your assessed valuation and depending on the payoff of your bond amounts. But as we sit here today, our bonding capacity is $965 million. Now again, I want to just clarify this word bonding capacity. The $965 million isn't what you can ask the voters for. You can ask the voters for more, you can ask the voters to approve much less. It's completely up to you. This is just a state statutory required calculation that just measures how many bonds or how much bonds are outstanding at any given period. On the left, that's just an assessed valuation, historical performance within our district. As you can see here, even during the teeth of the Great Recession, we fared relatively well to some of the other neighboring districts or some of the other communities in California in that we only had 1 year of negative AV growth. And ever since that, we've had a very stable growth. And this current year, we grew just under 4%. So that's a healthy rate of growth. And the 25-year average growth rate, that's 4.75%. I would like you to just keep that figure in the back of your mind as we go through this presentation, because this is going to come back again. So now let's move on to the next. This is the second consideration, I think, when you're trying to formulate a successful bond plan. It's the phasing and timing of the individual bond issues. Now, one of the common questions I get asked by community members is, are we locked in? Are we set to these bond draw amounts? Because what we like to do is we like to space out the bond draws every 3 years. Dr. Hayek mentioned that most of these bonds are issued as non-taxable bonds or tax-exempt bonds. And that's the reason why we space them out by 3 years. In order for us to qualify for that non-taxable or tax-exempt interest rate, we need to be able to spend our bond proceeds within 3 years. And that's the reason behind why we intentionally spread out those bond draw amounts by 3 years. So going back to the question about, is this locked in stone? No, it's not. Only thing that's locked in stone is the total bond package amount, that total authorization amount. None of the timing, the scheduling of the bond draws is locked in stone. And a good bond plan is a living bond plan that can adjust with your changing facilities needs, because we all know construction cost escalation and your needs change over time. And a good bond plan should be able to adjust and meet those needs. Here, what I like, so if you see the bottom table, these were I like to call sort of the bookends of what might be available for the district. And this is just a conversational starter. This isn't what we're proposing or what we're recommending, but sort of the bookends. We mentioned that the district's tax rate can go up to $60, or that's what's legally available to you. Assuming a $60 tax rate and solving for a standard 30-year repayment period for each of the bond draw, the district could theoretically or hypothetically ask the voters to approve a $900 million bond package. Now let's look at the other end of the book, the $32.70. The reason why we chose this number is because this ties in with what the community is currently paying under Measure I. And the repayment periods for these bond issues, I'll show you in the next slide, is similar to what the Measure I repayment period is, in which at the time of approval of Measure I in 2014, we estimated to the voters it'll be about a 25-year repayment period for the entirety of the bond plan. And this bond plan on the far left, or in the middle column, assumes just that, a 25-year total repayment from start to finish, similar to Measure I. So I thought this might just be a good starting point for us to start the discussion, and these are sort of the bookends, if you will. Final thing, typical bond program is drawn within 10 years. Some school districts may go for 15, some will go even beyond that. But I found that typical school districts will plan a bond plan to be drawn within 10 years. Next slide, Victor. So term of the individual bond issue. Why is this important? This is important because we don't necessarily want to use 30-year bonds to repay 15-year average lived projects. You know, a number of years ago, some school districts got criticized for issuing 30-year bonds to pay for iPads, laptop computers and such. And we want to avoid that situation. So we want to make sure that the repayment period of our bonds matches that of the projects in which the bond money is being used to pay for. So these are all the bullets that help us to stay compliant, not only with the federal laws, state laws, but also to remain just fiscally prudent in terms of how we structure our bond issue and the repayment period. The bottom table there, that's the repayment period which I shared with you in the prior slide. You see the final year of tax levy under that $32.70 tax rate, $32.70 tax rate, is estimated to be 2051 to 52, which is about 25 years, assuming a 2026 bond election date. And then the far right, the other end of the bookend, that's assuming a 30-year repayment period for each of the bond draws, which is the standard repayment period for many of the school district bonds in the state. So this is the second consideration that the district should keep in mind. The third consideration is the tax rate. And this is probably the most important for the community members. You know, again, we do have $60, but it's a common practice for school districts to target a different tax rate. And the tax rate that you may want to target is determined based upon a community survey. A community pollster will speak with a sample size of your voters, and he will make an assessment about where the voters are in terms of what dollar amount and what tax rate they're willing to support. So based on that, we will derive at a bond package amount and we'll determine what the tax rate might be. But just for your reference, you do have up to $60 available to the district. I mentioned earlier on that the law has since changed since the passage of Measure I in 2014. And that law is AB 195. As you can see here, now we have to include the estimated tax rate as well as the total bond repayment amount and the average annual repayment amount. You can imagine the shorter duration of repayment period, that average figure will go up. The longer repayment period, that average dollar amount will decrease. So those are some of the things that we should be mindful about as we're coming up with our bond plan as well, because that will have an influence in what the voters will see when they step into the ballot box. And then finally, the assessed valuation. This is often overlooked by many school districts because, you can keep your tax rates, projected tax rates low if you assume, I would say, an aggressive AV growth. So for instance, if you're assuming a 10% growth every year over year over year, you could theoretically assume, let's say, a $40 tax rate or $30 tax rate. However, what may actually happen is if you only grow at 4%, that $40 tax rate or $50 tax rate that you might be projecting under a 10% growth rate might end up being $55 or $60, or worse, it could be $65. So we want to be very responsible about what AV growth we might assume. Now, having said that, though, if you're too conservative in your assessed valuation growth rate, let's say you assume 2%, which is the Prop 13 rate. If you're to do that, you may accidentally undersize your bond amount, your total bond package amount, because you may find yourself saying, under 2% assessed valuation growth rate, we may only be able to support a $200 million bond package because that's the maximum tax rate that is afforded to us. And what does that do? That may not allow you to address all of your facilities needs that are presented in front of you presently. So we want to be mindful about what assessed valuation growth rate we assume. Remember earlier on, we showed you an average 25-year growth rate of 4.75%. So based on that, we may look at maybe 3.75%, or we may assume a 4%, and that might be reasonable for a district like ours. But that's something that we should also be mindful about as we compile a bond package for the school district and determine the tax rate as well. So those are some of the considerations, what I like to call the 5 ingredients of a bond plan. The next slide are potential next steps if you're thinking towards a 26 election cycle. There are 2 dates that are available to us. There's the gubernatorial primary and there's the gubernatorial general election. Gubernatorial primary is a bit odd. It's not the March that which we're typically used to. It's in June. The general election is still in November. Now you'll see here, these are some broad categories of activities that the district should consider in undertaking towards these 2 possible dates. One key difference is that if you were to go for a June gubernatorial primary election date, you have a really condensed time period in which to effectuate a potential bond. And what that might do is, instead of being able to assess or reassess the community's appetite for a potential bond, we may only have 1 poll. And the district may be asked to act based on a single poll that may get done. It could be right before Christmas or right after Christmas, but based on that 1 poll. However, if we were to target a November general election, we may have another shot at assessing what the pulse of the community is. We might do a baseline poll earlier on in the process. Maybe that's right before Christmas or right after Christmas. And then we may do another tracking poll right before we come before you to approve a resolution calling for the election, so that you have a fresh set of data as to what the community is willing to support. But I won't go into all these items because I know Jared's presentations cover some of this information, but this is just broad categories of how we might march towards these 2 potential election dates. So that concludes my slides. I know it's a lot of information. I try to be relatively brisk, so But if you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and more than happy to answer them.
Any questions? Thank you.
Just a couple. I know this is probably pretty obvious, but that $60 is per, like, it's not additive.
That's correct. It's per bond measure. So
Per
you get a
bond measure.
brand new $60 for any new bond election.
Okay.
So it's separate from Measure I.
And then I guess I just want to understand a little better about what drives the assessed valuation.
Sure.
Like, what are the factors that we would look at to, I know we can look retrospectively at the past 25 years, but what should we be thinking about looking forward?
Yeah. So there are a few factors that will drive assessed valuation. For most districts, it's the turnover of homes. 75% of our assessed valuation is made up of single-family homes and condominiums. So as those homes and condos turn over to new ownership, what you do is you see a step up in the value as they turn over. The second driver is new construction. If we have new developments within the district, whether it be new commercial properties, new residential properties, those will drive your assessed valuation higher. So those are the two main. Yeah.
And then I guess we'll talk about this later in the polling, but obviously there's going to be a 10-year overlap for the tax rate with Measure I plus whatever this new measure might be called. So I assume we would have to, maybe not in the bond language, but as we're talking to the community, provide that information.
Yes. I remember during Measure I, we were very clear about that. We had a frequently asked questions about Measure R, Measure I, and the tax rates and how they might overlap or not overlap in that case. So that's one of the things that we should inform the community about if the district would like to proceed.
Yes, go ahead.
So in that 10-year overlap period, would the tax rate not double, but would they stack, I'm assuming?
That would stack, exactly.
Okay.
So for 10 years, let's just, for using a figure, let's say we targeted 3270 again. So for 10 years, the taxpayers would pay 6540, and then after 10 years, it would go back to 3270.
That's correct.
And that's per assessed $100,000 on the home value, correct?
That's correct. I know this is a common question you might get asked in the grocery aisle. Your neighbors might ask, "Hey, I hear you're thinking about a bond. You're going to double my taxes, right? My home is worth $2 million." And then you'd have to say, well, the taxes are levied not on the market value of your homes, but the assessed value. Or I tell my friends and my wife, just try to calculate your taxes based on what you bought your home for rather than what you could sell your home for today. And I mentioned earlier, for a typical homeowner within the district, this is 50% below, 50% above. The middle value, the tax value is $700,000.
Is there a figure, this may be a dumb question or hypothetical, is there a figure that says how much evaluation increases by the quality of the facilities of your schools?
I don't have that information, but I think generally.
I want to go to parents and say, yeah, your house is worth $2 million because we're a great school district.
Yeah, I'll give you anecdotal evidence. So my friend recently purchased a home, and he bought a home on the borderline of two separate school districts. And he asked his realtor, why is the house across the street from me, which is virtually identical, 15% less than what I'm paying for? I want to pay that much. And the realtor said, it's because you're in two different school districts. You're in what's perceived to be a better school district, and therefore there's more demand for your home, and therefore the value is higher. So yes, the perceived, the educational power or the educational excellence of a school district does matter for home values. You're welcome.
Would we need to have a separate citizens bond oversight committee? Or could it be one committee looking at both bonds?
You can have the same members, staff for the same, for the different measure.
Thank you. Just curious on that one.
No, that's another very common question. Do we need to find another set of members for a separate committee? No, you can ask the same committee members to join both.
Do we see a lot of school districts that do have multiple bond measures going at the same time across the state?
There are school districts that would explore multiple bond measures. So there are school districts, for instance, will have passed a bond, let's say, 3 or 4 years ago. And they realize that those bonds were earmarked or promised to the voters to address specific projects. But we now need money for another set of projects. So then they would ask a community member, we're spending your bond money as promised on these set of projects. However, we do need money for this other set of projects, so we'd like to ask you for different bond authorization. So Jared and I both worked on a school district bond. The first bond measure addressed just the high school projects, modernizing, equipping, and improving high school facilities only. The district later realized, well, we now need money for middle schools and elementary, and we're running out of money. So the district, after about a 4-year window, asked the community pass a separate bond measure just for middle and high school facilities. So yes, it's a common practice that school districts do to have multiple bond measures.
Any other questions this time? You're sticking around, right?
Yes.
Because I know we may have other questions
Sure.
later after we've gone through some more.
Happy
Thank
to.
you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Dr. Hayek, I wanted to ask, before we move to our next presentation, could you give us a really short summary of the needs, the outstanding needs that we're actually looking at, which gives us the context of why we're actually even exploring another bond measure? Maybe just chunk it out and kind of some of the big needs.
So it's like $500 million of projects, total estimated value. Most of them are infrastructure. You gotta, when Measure I came about, Lang Ranch and Sycamore Canyon were the newest schools that we had, so they got half the allocation that the other schools got. So fast forward 10 years, so those HVAC units at those schools are now 10 years older on a lifespan of roughly 20 to 25 years for units. That's an example of every year we go by, our facilities age and the mechanicals behind them age. At the same time, you have higher demand for electricity. There are asphalt projects that need to be done. Parking lots crack every year. Concrete, trees rip up, roots rip up concrete. Concrete has to be redone. We did replace some windows at schools, but windows and drafts become an issue. What else we got? Roofs are the biggest, the high ticket items. We've done a lot of patching on roofs, but we have a number of schools, probably I'm going to say 90% of our schools are, if they don't need one now, they're going to need one in the future to replace the roof work that's done.
Just to follow on to that, because what I'm trying to get my head around is the timing of those needs. So $500 million in projects, how much of that would be necessary next 5 years, next 10 years, next 1 year? I mean, is there any way to kind of assess that a bit?
We'd have to rank the projects in priority order, and we did do the same thing on Measure I when we did the facility master plans. What comes into question is wants and needs. So, our facilities need things, but, our principals and schools and students have wants. So balancing the two becomes a critical piece. The list that we put together is mostly needs. things that you may not find attractive or, get a lot of PR for, but it's things that are going to keep our schools well-maintained, safe, and running well. Roofs are probably the biggest priority. Everything's fine until it rains. And then once it rains, then not only do we end up patching roofs, and then we start doing work inside for any water damage that's been done. And so those kinds of things. Parking lots, like I said, we have a number of parking lots and playgrounds that should be asphalted probably within the next 5 years. We have concrete work through the district that should be addressed within the next 5 years. And there are some things that obviously can wait for a longer time frame, but HVAC is the same thing. We could wait until it breaks down, but then we're running without ventilation for however long until those units are replaced or repaired. So trying to be proactive in the sense of, like, if we're looking at mechanicals and they're approaching 25 years old, we need to replace them. Now, can we wait 5 years? Sure, we can wait 10 years as long as they keep running, but then when they don't, we have to jump in and repair, replace them.
Okay, thank you.
And I think I would note, even if we were to go out for $5 million and it passed and we did all the projects on this list, facilities would still generate a list of other projects that need to get done. So I mean, it's a never-ending cycle of needs and wants on a school campus as well, so.
I don't know how to phrase this, does the needs have a tendency to minimize the work that we've already done? In other words, let's say we need a new roof at one of the schools that has new science labs. Would the leakage destroy, or not destroy, but harm the science lab to the point where it would reverse the progress we've already made?
There's always potential for damage. I will say, referring specifically to science buildings, there's always the issue of potential damage. We've done a good job of maintaining what we have. It's just a matter of, you can only patch so much, and then you continue to patch over patch over patch. Whereas, the roofing contractors will tell you that you need to redo the whole roof. If we don't have the money for it, we'll just continue to patch it and we'll just chase the leaks, for example. There are subsequent fallouts from, potential leaks, like we repair inside of classrooms and damage. We haven't had any catastrophic repairs related to roofs, but it's just, you got to think of 28 schools and 31 facilities. There's always leaks everywhere. But we're not alone. You could walk into Target and Costco and there's a garbage can sitting in the middle of the aisle and it leaks when it rains, right? So, we do our best to keep up with it. It's just a matter of being proactive of, we've identified roofs that need to be done, for example, and they really should be done within the next 5 to 10 years. And if they're not, then what's going to happen is they're just going to deteriorate quicker and quicker. Well, I wouldn't say reverse, but I would say it would result in increased costs where we could be using it for other things, but we would be having to do like a classroom over again or twice, or carpeting or flooring or ceilings or HVAC or electrical or whatever it is.
Thank you.
I just want to make a note that we're not talking solely about maintenance. The issue of all of our roofs definitely causes me to lose sleep, but I think everyone understands that we're running a world-class school district with some 50-year-old infrastructure, and we have an opportunity to look forward and to invest. For example, we've added dozens or more programs, and we've done our very best to adapt and retrofit the infrastructure that we have. But this is an opportunity to go to the voting public and say, we have a 21st century student body and we're thinking ahead, and we have the opportunity to give them world-class facilities looking into the future. And that's an exciting, hopeful prospect.
I do agree with that, and I do especially when you look back at where the Measure I money was spent. I mean, the STEM building is just a wonderful example. And just to be clear, are there any other buckets of money that could be tapped for any of this?
No bucket's that big.
Tiny little buckets?
We take, so we collect the developer fees from things going on, developments in the community. That could range anywhere between, a couple $100,000 to, maybe around $1 million a year. And then we still receiving Topaz funds, which are about $1.5 million a year. With the Measure I and the conclusion of Measure I and the time limits of spending down those dollars, we've really held on to Topaz and developer donations, but they each have timelines as well. You have to spend developer donation fees within 2 years from when we receive them. So we manage as best as we can. So we do have some other pots, but it's not enough to do large projects. They basically, what they do is they help us maintain, and we'll use it to patch roofs, but we don't really have enough to do the entire roof. We'll replace one HVAC mechanical rather than do them all, and we just chase them as they break down. So if we don't, if there's a bond, then that's great, and if there isn't, then we'll just continue to use those funds to keep our facilities maintained as best we can and as safe as we can do it. As Dr. McLaughlin said, no matter what, you can issue bond or not issue bond. There'll always be a list of things to do. Just like, you wake up Saturday or Sunday at your house and something you didn't expect to do has to get done. And, it's kind of a never ending type of thing, because over time, between the sun and the rain and the weather and use, it's wear and tear on our school sites that just need to be addressed at some point in time.
Great, thank you. Any other questions on that, or are we ready for our next presentation?
Can I ask Jen one question? Is there any data that supports, like the time frame of one bond issue ending, not the projects ending, and then going out and asking for another bond and starting a new set of projects instead of seeing an overlap? In your experience, is there anything that would be like a 2-year gap or a 3-year gap? Because I know that there was time between Measure R and Measure I of projects, so then the community knows that projects have been done, even though they're still paying on some of them, but there was a gap in between the two bonds. Is there any data out there that supports one way or the other?
I haven't particularly seen a data that supports one way or the other on that. I think what's important when you have multiple bonds going on or multiple sets of projects going on at the same time is to make sure to inform the community and educate them that Measure I monies are already set aside and they have been committed for these types of projects in which we have promised you back in 2014. Now we're looking to tackle a new set of projects, a new set of needs, if you will, and we're asking you voters to support a new bond to address those separate needs. You're welcome.
Also with us today is Jared Boygan. He's going to glean some information for us. He's a consultant that could provide additional services for the board in consideration of whether to move forward or how to move forward with a bond. So, Jared?
Thank you, Victor, Dr. McLaughlin, board members. It's great to see you all, see some familiar faces here. My name's Jared Boygan. I'm with Team Civics, and I also had the pleasure of working on the Measure I bond in 2014, and it's really, it's a treat to come back to a district and see the impact of these funds. People in my industry were basically political strategists, political consultants, and my firm, we've grown up all and kind of doing politics. And it's one thing to work on candidate elections when you hope to elect good people and you hope that they can do good things when they get there, but to really be able to focus on these kinds of election issues where when you pass it, the money is going to do something very significant and really generational, and then be able to come back, 10, 12 years later and see it, it's really a privilege. So I appreciate it. I'm excited to be back with you all. So I have just a couple of slides, and I will try to fill in some gaps. These have been really informative, excellent presentations. I've sat through lots and lots of these kinds of presentations, and you guys really got a very thorough and I think well-explained picture today. So I'm just going to try and fill in some gaps. So first is just as a way of comparing, right, the election itself. Your registered voters back in 2014, about 82,000. It's gone up about 15% since then. The math, the yes percent math is not quite right. It was correct on Gin's slides, about 65% when the final votes were in. I think this was the first election night result. You know, the numbers kind of crawl up over the last 30 days. So I think this is an archival number that was sitting around in our system somewhere. But the turnout in 2014 was very low, and maybe some of you may remember this, that this was a midterm Jerry Brown reelection, no real competition, no controversy, and it ended up being the lowest turnout in California gubernatorial history since women got the right to vote. Very low turnout. I do not expect that to happen again in the November 2026 election. In fact, the last Trump midterm, which was 2018, we had quite a bump in participation. Gubernatorial elections are never quite the same as presidential elections. A higher education, higher wealth community like this one, the gap is smaller than in some other parts of California, but there's always a gap. Presidential is the high water mark, gubernatorial is somewhere below that. In this case, we would project something like a 65% turnout next fall. And as you can see, you know, there has been growth and change in the voter base. The next slide, please, Victor. Now, this is an interesting slide because what's been the growth and change in your voter base here? Well, you've gotten bluer. So in 2014, by turnout, it was a 14-point Republican advantage in the actual turnout on the natural in 2014. And this has historically been a fairly conservative community, and it probably still feels like a fiscally conservative community, and we would want to approach it that way. Obviously, one of the keys to the Measure I success was making sure that not just Democrats, but Republicans and independent voters were comfortable and on board, and that still has to be part of a game plan going forward for this community. You couldn't really try to win this like you do something like in, you know, Los Angeles Unified, where they're really counting on high Democrat turnout and they don't really care about other voters. That's not what this community is like, and so we wouldn't do that. But that said, the voter registration has really flipped. It's about a 5-point Democrat advantage in terms of a likely vote projection. Again, it doesn't necessarily feel that way maybe in the civic culture of things, although maybe you do feel it. But that's very much what's happened over the last 12 years in this community. And that's not an unusual change for California, although it's a little bit more dramatic here than in some other places. Next slide, please. And then this is an age chart. This is also, I think, very interesting to see that when we were on the ballot in 2014, you can see that there were much taller bars, particularly in that 45 to 54 range, that we had a lot of younger homeowners, well, middle-aged homeowners, I call us younger homeowners, middle-aged homeowners. But you can see that as the, you know, in over 12 years, right, our 45 to 55-year-olds are now 55 to 64-year-olds. Our 55 to 64-year-olds are now on the end at the senior citizen bar, and we're not necessarily getting the same rate of turnover at the lower end of people moving in or returning home, and maybe that's a cost of housing issue or, you know, housing turnover, as Jen was talking about a few minutes ago. But it's interesting. Now, I would not say this is necessarily bad news for Bond, because one thing we see around the state is that actually it's we middle-aged people between 45 and 65 who are the toughest sell for bond elections because, you know, in a way we're getting kind of the double squeeze, right? You're thinking about, you got kids to pay for college, you're thinking about your own retirement, you may have aging parents. There's a lot of expense kind of piling up. So we have found that in some ways, even more than the sort of senior citizen on fixed income, which is the traditional political story around it, in actual polling data, we tend to find that 45 to 65 is a little bit of a tougher gap. And then by the time you get to seniors, again, particularly in a little bit of a well-off community here, you know, seniors, they may be on fixed incomes, but, you know, they've done some planning and they kind of know what they have. And a little bit of a tax increase is less frightening to them in some cases. And in many cases, you know, they have fond memories of their kids being in these schools, and they may have grandchildren in the schools now. So I wouldn't say that that's necessarily bad news, but it is interesting to look at how the demographics have changed in 12 years. There has not been significant change. 93% of your likely voters are the city of Thousand Oaks. You have a few neighborhoods that are county pocket that are unincorporated. I'm sure you guys are aware of which neighborhoods those are. The boundaries are the same, and it doesn't look like there's been significant development that has changed the balance of that in the last 12 years. So this is my last slide, and it's a little bit more of a visual representation of the timeline that Jin was discussing on his last slide. So I'm going to slow down on this one a little bit. We start talking about bond elections, and we're all veterans of political campaigns, and we instantly start thinking about lawn signs and precinct walks and recruiting volunteers and phone banks. God, Jared, you're not going to make us do phone banks, are you? And no, I will not make you do phone banks. We don't do that anymore. It's not effective. But we do precinct walks, and we do social media, and we do all that grassroots effort. But all of that is at the end of the process. It happens in the last 100 days. And the district, very importantly, cannot fund it, cannot direct it, right? It has to be volunteer-led and privately funded. And, we did raise something like $200,000, I believe, for the Measure I campaign back in 2014. These days, it's a little bit more expensive because we have to maintain, everybody votes by mail now, right? Everybody gets a ballot about the beginning of the month. The ballots are live for 30 days. And we have to do both direct mail and more social digital investment than we did in 2014. We did some in 2014, but not like we do today. So, there will be fundraising. All that happens at the end. But what's in my experience, in my company, we've done this for something like 600 ballot measures for cities and school districts and other kinds of public agencies over the last 25 plus years. In our experience, the 3 sets of activities that fit under the blue arrows, which can be district directed, can be district funded as long as we follow the rules, make the most difference between putting something successful on the ballot and putting something on the ballot that has a very low chance of success. And we can take these and if we follow these milestones systematically, that's best practices. So the first is test, right? And Jen talked about a voter survey. I think that's on the agenda this morning, is to discuss that a little bit as well. And I'm happy to answer some questions, even though I don't think you have pollsters in attendance this morning. We don't do the polling, but I generally work very closely with the polling firms. And so I'm happy to try and answer if you have questions about that as this comes up this morning. We will have to identify a targeted tax rate. Jen was suggesting $32.70 this morning. A targeted bond amount, maybe it's $400 million, maybe it's a little bit less, maybe it's a little bit more. We can kind of have those conversations. We have to get a preliminary proposal kind of more or less agreed on, and we test it for a November 2026 likely electorate, as I was describing in the first couple of charts, right? And we use a qualified opinion research firm to do that. And then we identify, is there feasibility? Is it possible that your voters would support a bond in November of 2026? Sometimes the answer is no, and if the answer is no, then we stop and we look at 2028 or something like that. And, you've got some good data. Data is always valuable. Now you know what your voters think. It's like checking the oil on a car, and you come back and check it again in a couple of years and see if 2028 looks viable, right? But if it does show path to feasibility, then we learn a couple of other key things from the survey as well. We learn a little bit about tax sensitivity and tax tolerance, price tag. We also learn what kind of projects and programs are most important to your voters. How do they feel about the aging HVACs? How do they feel about the leaky roofs? How do they feel about parking lots and playgrounds? What do they think of as priorities? What's their perception of how you've spent past bond funds? How many of them are aware? Remember on the first slide I showed you there's 94,000 likely voters. That is not the number of people that come to your board meetings and read your budget reports, right? And most of them are not, in fact, even parents or staff in the schools, right? And remember that age chart, right? A lot of them are senior citizens. So how much they really know about what you've done and what the schools look like, we're going to find some of that out in the poll. Because their perception is going to be third hand, not first hand or second hand, right? They won't have that personal experience. So we're going to understand their perception, and we're going to understand what kinds of conditions and priorities and programs will make sense. Because one thing about bond measures is you almost can never sell a community a bond that it doesn't want. The path to success is identifying the things that your community cares about and then build a proposal that matches what their priorities are, right? So we're going to use the poll to identify that roadmap. Then we're going to vet this measure. And again, this is very important because if we wait until that last 100 days, when you guys are out there busily knocking on doors and asking city council members for their endorsements and all that stuff happens, and they start to raise objections or questions about the bond program, and this is the first time you've heard those objections or questions, it's too late. You can't do anything to fix it, right? It's not like running for city council. You wake up on Tuesday morning and somebody's angry about the rules for parking downtown, then by Tuesday afternoon, they are the parking candidate, right? They can solve that problem. We don't get to do that in a school bond. We have to fix everything before you put it on the ballot. So that vetting program, that second blue arrow, is all about us being transparent about what you're thinking, going out and talking to people. You have both internal and external audiences, right? You have to get out to your school sites, get out to your parent organizations, get to your staff and faculty, make sure that they know you're thinking about it, and hear their concerns, hear their questions, try and answer those questions. And all that gets factored in prior to finalizing the actual proposal. What kind of, so we have quantitative data from the survey results, but now we need to get really qualitative data from our community leaders, our parent leaders, our city council members, maybe our former board members or former city council members, county supervisor, the Taxpayers Association, all these folks who we hope by the time it's actually on the ballot are willing to stand up and be for it. But in the beginning, we had to get them time to be comfortable with it. So that is probably the biggest reason not to think about that June primary, as Jen was saying. We just wouldn't have time for that. But for November, we do have time, right? We would use basically the entire January to April, January to May period for this vetting set of conversations. And I think you all know, I can see the wheels turning, right? Who are the 20 people you think have to be talked to? Right? And each of you probably has your own list of that. And I know the superintendent has a list, and, we'll help you kind of make that list and cultivate it. And, we'll help you create non-advocacy informational materials so that everybody's singing from the same hymn book, right? These cannot be advocacy materials. Remember, the district cannot advocate for passage of a bond. So we'll have to get legal counsel involved and make sure that the materials are appropriately informational. In these materials, we'll strike a balance between talking about Measure I versus talking about the current needs. It's not usually best practice to lead into a new bond by reminding people that they're paying on an old bond. Usually it's best practice to talk about what your current needs are, but lots of people are going to have questions about, wait, didn't we do this and what happened? And so we'll have to have a good set of materials about that. Right? And so we'll help you get all of that together, and then there will be lots of conversation, PowerPoint slides for, a Chamber of Commerce breakfast or a PTA meeting, a one-page handout leave behind that you can take to a Rotary Club lunch, those kinds of things. To seek feedback and really understand where are sticking points, if there are any, and then help bring that information back to the superintendent, back to Victor and his team, so that the proposal can be refined before it's finalized. And then we move on to the third milestone, which is the building of the measure, which is, those of you that remember Measure I, the ballot measure itself is a legal document. It's not a spreadsheet about budgets and projects. And so all of that information has to be baked into a legal ballot resolution that your bond council will draft. And there's a tax rate statement attached to it. And so we have to make sure that all of our quantitative survey information, as well as our qualitative, we'll kind of weigh and balance. Usually qualitative information is not consistent. But we'll sort of weigh and balance what we've heard from the community and bake all that into a proposal that we feel like meets your community's priorities. So for example, in the Measure I situation, part of that involved only 15-year payback bonds. That was exceptionally important to several members of your community, including a board member at the time. So that ended up being baked into what the final proposal was. And then some of the focus on the types of projects was also based on both the quantitative and the qualitative feedback that came from the community. And it's great to see that you guys have delivered so overwhelmingly successfully on those promises. And then Ventura County is a 120-day county, meaning you have to put it on the ballot no later than 120 days prior to the election. In this case, that's July 6th of 2026. Realistically, that means a June, or I saw Jen's presentation, he targeted a potential May 20th board meeting. That is the time when you would actually have to make your final vote, your commitment to put it on the ballot. Up until that time, we're doing planning, we're doing transparency, we're doing vetting, we're doing community conversations. You haven't actually committed to do anything until that vote in May or June of next summer. All of this is leading up to it, which, again, if we follow the 3 steps, and we're systematic about it, by the time that vote comes, hopefully all of you feel very confident about what your community's opinion is. We have both quantitative data and qualitative data. And again, going back to the polling, in some cases, we'll do a second survey. Let's say we do a first survey, in November of this fall. We may find that in April or May, and I believe Jen's slide mentioned this as well, we want to refresh that polling data just to see, have people's opinions about the economy changed at all, do we have to check a different price tag than we tested in the first survey? So sometimes we'll do a tracking survey, and that's, a lot of boards like to do that before they make that final vote. So that's what the process looks like, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. So one of my questions when I was looking at this was that timeline and that process, which you really laid it out really well. So because it's clear that the district can only fund and do specific pieces of this versus whatever happens with the community and the volunteers and the fundraising. So you're saying really those first three can really fall under the district purview, if you will, while it's just that four that would be that actual campaign and really that fundraising. So is there any overlap at all? I mean, at some point, are we starting to have, I assume we'd probably even start to have these qualitative conversations with influencers, et cetera, maybe even earlier than January, I'm assuming. Where is there some overlap? When would a committee be formed? I'm really just curious about some of those.
Yeah, that's a really great and very essential question. The bullet under here that says community readiness, you see at the bottom of the vetting, that's really our way of sort of indicating that the whole way through that transparency, community influencer conversation process, we have to have our antenna up for how that community committee is going to come together, because it isn't really responsible for you as a board to put on the ballot and then look around and say, okay, how are we going to get this done, right? We want to know that it's going to happen. So as you're going through those conversations, yes, I think you want to be thinking about who are my leaders, who are my volunteers that are going to be on that committee. Where's my fundraising going to come from? Now, districts that have done successful bond construction programs like you have usually some pretty eager donors already lined up, because while you've been managing the projects in-house, you've had all kinds of private vendors doing work, right? Replacing HVACs and building buildings and installing, concrete and pipe and wiring and all those things. And, those are folks who if you had another $200 or $300 or $400 million to spend, they would find themselves, they think they would be pretty competitive in bidding for that work. So they will be very supportive of a bond without any promise of getting future work, but just they think they'll be in good stead to compete for the work. So they will be excited to do that. And you may have, some other folks as well, right? You might have building trades, labor unions who like to do these jobs, right? Electrical workers and plumbers and pipe fitters and, other folks who, like to support campaigns that create jobs for their members. So having some idea about where that money is going to come from, but importantly, who are the volunteer leaders, right? Who are my parent leaders who can really mobilize within the parent community? It's usually useful to have a couple of folks from the non-parent community who are active in the civic world who can help you do some of that. And, we can help you kind of think about what that committee looks like as it comes together. But it's a good flag, and we have to be thinking about it kind of all the way through.
One more really quick before I pass it on. When we do the polling in the fall, how often would you say you get a very clear picture of whether a measure would be successful or not? How clear versus maybe more muddled kind of results?
I would say generally the picture is pretty clear. Sometimes we get results that are very borderline, and then it's usually a conversation about what kind of movement we see within the course of the voter survey, because the survey itself is, 15 or 17-minute questionnaire, and we do that dipstick check, as I talked about earlier. Well, how do people feel about a bond? But then we introduce information to them, and we see how people's opinions change throughout the course of the survey, and that's an indicator for us of what kind of trends or flexibility there might be in your electorate. If they're introduced to more information, might they move? So in those cases, then we try to read to see kind of what else is in the survey to find out if there's a path forward. But look, if the survey comes back and says there's no path forward, we'll be the first to tell you. It doesn't do us any good to send you down a path where you're not successful. You'll take 2 steps backwards, and it'll be much harder to pick it up in the future. So we want to find you in a road to success. If we don't see it for the first path, we'll tell you.
Any questions? Go ahead, Trustee Kern.
Thank you. I think this question might be for both of you, but is there any sort of benefit to doing it in June? It seems like everything points toward doing it in the November election.
I would be concerned about June. One, for the timing, I just don't think you have time to be transparent about your intentions before you'd actually have to commit as a board. And then two is, as the electorate shrinks, it does tend to get older and more conservative. So a lot of your parents, your younger voters who have the most invested in it, they're just less typically regular primary voters than they are general election voters. So you also get a less favorable electorate along with the timing questions. Jin, did you want to add?
No, I think that's what I was going to say. You know, typically what we see between the primary and the general election is a voter turnout.
Okay.
The size of the turnout typically fares better for bonds the more people we have show up
Yeah.
to vote. So that's all I
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
How much of an effect, I know we're not supposed to combine these, they're totally separate, but it's kind of like an elephant in the room. 60% of our board is running for reelection next year. I'm not assuming anything. Let me put it this way. I'm running for reelection next year. How much of an overlap is the personal election versus a bond measure election?
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, it happens all the time because most of these bonds are on in November elections, and 2 or 3 members of pretty much every school board is up in a November election. So it's a very common problem that school districts have when they pursue bonds. It almost always comes up. So I would say what's really important generally is that those of you who are running feel good about what your talking points are, both about what you've accomplished, what Measure I projects have been done, as well as why the current needs are there. We do find that it's really helpful to have unanimity among the sitting board when you go forward for a measure like this. You need at least 4 votes to put it on the ballot. 5 is better. That sort of unanimity of purpose is really important. And that was a big part of the Measure I conversation, in fact, was trying to, how could we work with our internal board dynamics to get as many people comfortable as we could make them. And then Measure I is another good example here, is you had actually some pretty contested board elections at that time, and in fact, some candidates who were a little bit tepid, about the idea of a bond, and that can create some challenges. So ideally, you don't have people running for the board against the bond. That doesn't mean that they're either going to automatically win their seat or beat your measure, but it does get to, again, this sort of vetting process in the middle. It's really important that the bond is on the ballot at a time when you've already had conversations with people like the Taxpayers Association and the Chamber of Commerce and, influential citizens who may have previously been elected to city council or school board or something. You guys will know whose voice matters and whose doesn't in the community. But when you have some people out there who may potentially say that they oppose something, you want to make sure that you have credible folks, particularly who speak credibly to conservative voters, fiscally conservative voters, who say, no, I've looked at this bond and I think it's a good idea. I've had a few months to study it, and I think that the tax rate is reasonable, and I think the projects are important, and I believe the district can be trusted. So it does make some of that political surround, more important, I would say. But elections, sometimes you can't control everything that everybody says or does.
So you just underscored one of my main points, was I want to thank you for understanding this community, because what you just articulated is exactly what made Measure I so successful. If another local government entity was going to put out a tax or a bond or something on the same ballot, does that impact our ability? Do you see any interplay between that?
I mean, the one that would really be the one we'd want to pay the most attention to would be the city, because there's so much overlap between your voters and the city voters. I think if the county was to do something, that's a different conversation with your voters. I guess the Park District, there's been some talk, that's the other one that kind of really overlaps your measures. Voters really do look at these things individually. We're Californians, we are used to long ballots. That is a thing that happens. Voters go through the same process on each one. When you're going to participate, it's not a thing you're going to knock out in 10 minutes. You're going to have to sit down at the counter with your pamphlet. You're going to have to read through the thing. You're going to have to flip. And so voters are kind of used to this idea of, let me look at each measure. Do I think this is an important purpose? Do I trust the people who are behind it? Do I think the spending is going to be done responsibly? Do I think it's priced in a way that I can afford it? And then I'll go and look at the next one. it's unlikely that you would have something that is so similar to the next proposal on the ballot, right? The park district is going to be about open space and probably fire protection and maybe kind of clean water kinds of things, runoff sorts of things. If the city was doing something, it would probably be potholes and public safety, that kind of thing. The county will be talking about health services, most likely, if they do anything. That's what counties are most concerned about these days. But you'll be the only ones talking about schools and education. And even if the community college district had something on where they will be doing CTE and, college transfer, you guys, we'll see in our poll how much we're talking about CTE. I actually think we'll test quite a bit of that. I liked what Victor said earlier about your adult ed and the vocational and shop projects you want to do there. I think those will actually be really attractive to your voters. So I want to test some of that. But we also were talking about little kids and their safety and those classrooms, things like that. So nobody else will be talking about that. So I don't think it's necessarily one of those things where it's automatically disqualifying. We worked in a very similar purple community in San Diego, suburban San Diego County last cycle, San Marcos, where we passed a school bond and a sales tax for the city on the same ballot. So it can be done, and it's not the sort of thing you would automatically just rule out.
Other questions? Yes.
Yes. Would the more foundational stages of the process up there, specifically like the survey and kind of crafting the language, take into consideration the attitudes that voters may have toward funding, given the federal discussions that are being had very publicly, specifically as it relates to educational funding?
Yep, 100%. That's a great question. All that, we do want to use the survey not just to test price sensitivity and projects for your bond, but sort of attitudinal questions. And a lot of that stuff is also baked in, right? Even if we don't ask about it directly, we can read in the results, there's concern about the economy here, right? I've seen polling where people give really high marks to their local school district, but they're not necessarily excited about a school bond, and some of that is indication of pessimism about the direction of the economy or something like that. So a lot of that stuff is baked in, and we can have some questions about, typically we find that local funding that can't be cut or taken by the state or federal government is one of the most important features. That was right up front in your Measure I ballot language, as Jen showed earlier. So that's likely to be probably a factor, but yeah, we'll learn a lot of that from the survey.
Just curious if we have a figure, and I don't know if someone will be able to answer this, what does it cost a district out of our funds to do 1, 2, and 3, and then ultimately, do we have to, as a district, do we pay for this to be on the ballot measure, or is it the committee that finances that portion of it as well? So I'm looking at what's the total cost to a school district to put this on?
Yeah, you mean the cost of the election, actually putting the measure on alongside your bond election, yeah. So, we charge a monthly fee, and there's a possibility of doing some, informational mailers if you wanted to do that, and if your, legal counsel is comfortable with it. That's a good way of doing transparency for those non-parent voters that you don't talk to, they're not subscribing to the superintendent's email newsletter and reading your social media channels, they're not following those things. So, how do we talk to them? So, I think a rough rule, and Victor, we were talking about this the other day, but I think we're probably, probably 200 to 250,000, including the voter surveys on the district side, is probably what this process, depending on if we do 1 or 2 voter surveys, and it could be less if we don't do any informational mail, or if we just do one piece of mail, maybe it's more like, $150,000 or something like that. The cost of putting it on the ballot is, I can't really give you an estimate. You'd have to get that from the county registrar of voters. I can tell you that it is less, the price tag will be lower for the district in a November election than it would be in a primary election, because there's more jurisdictions and more races, and so they spread out the cost burden more, but you'd really have to ask them for a ballpark.
So of the 200 to 250, in that first phase, if the voter surveys, there's some money we will commit to spending regardless. Yeah. Obviously, if it's clearly a no-go, then we've put in just really the polling costs and your monthly rate for a few months.
That's
correct?
Right. It's probably more, something like $50,000 or so is the initial feasibility cost, is how a lot of districts think about it, maybe 50 or 60 total. And then, if the indication is it's not our time, then you have data, and we, put it away and pick it up again for 28.
And so it really has to be the district, like, paying that to put it on the ballot.
I mean,
Like, that's not, I mean, there's no, I'm curious if there's any cost where there's some wiggle room, or if you had some really, our our committee is really ambitious in their fundraising, and they raise a bunch of money that could help out defray some of those costs.
I would discourage that. The hardest money to get is that campaign money at the end. I mean, we are talking about 94,000 likely voters who are going to have ballots live for 30 days, and who, it's not like the old days when you could just send them 2 pieces of mail and that's all they need to see. I mean, we get information, we are bombarded for, all the time by information, and so a campaign has to really compete for voters' attention. And even over those 30 days, right, even though we try to be efficient about it, and if you vote, we'll take you out of the universe, we'll stop serving you ads or sending you mail, but, the data is kind of a fishhook. You get a few people that are like my wife, and they're super organized. They get their ballot, and they sit down on the first weekend, and they do it, and then she sends her ballot in, and boom. But I live in the same house as she does, and I'm at the far end of the fishhook, and I just don't get around to it till the end. And if you look at the data, it's a little burst at the beginning. There's a trickle of ballots in the middle of the month, and then half of them come in the final week, and as many as 25% come in on the last day. And you actually have 3 or 4 days. Ballots can be received 3 days after the date now in California, right? So we have to communicate all the way through the fishhook. So it really if you're part of that campaign committee at the end, I can tell you'll be like counting every penny. So I really try to discourage my jurisdictions from putting that burden on their volunteers, because you're going to be asking plenty of them anyway.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Okay. I think for now, we're good. Ready to move on? Thank you so much. Okay, so we're moving on to our action items. And I know that first one is 3A. There is a resolution put before us. Do I have a motion?
President Powell,
Yes.
I move that we approve resolution number 25/26-12, exploring the feasibility of a potential local facilities general obligation bond measure as submitted.
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. I think, Dr. Hug, did you have any comments on this that you wanted to? Okay. Does anybody have any comments or questions on the resolution? Yes. Go ahead.
So, I mean, I asked this earlier, but we have that facilities or the needs list, and part of this resolution is to, we direct you to do a further assessment of the needs, and that would include a timing and the like, and a need versus want. Is that the way this resolution reads?
We'll continue on our needs assessment. It actually happens on an ongoing basis, and we will add to the list that we have. If there's a request for a formal long-term facilities assessment or master plan, we would obviously engage an architectural firm or a different consulting firm to come in and do that for us, and that's more of a $500,000 to $750,000 cost if there's a formal plan. But the resolution just authorizes us at this point to have conversation and engage in the discussions with board approval, so no one's saying that this is anyone outside of the board acting alone or without consent of the board in looking at this feasibility.
So, can you go into a little more detail about what, if we were to spend the 500 to plus on a facilities, like what exactly would that look like or entail?
So it would entail a physical inspection of every single school that we have. It would entail meetings with stakeholders, families, administrators, students, to determine needs. We did something similar with Measure I. It was actually after the bond passed, though, with Measure I. We called them charrettes, but they were essentially cluster meetings. There's a lot of, kind of to our earlier conversation about mechanicals, how many HVAC units have to be looked at and inspected, and evaluation of concrete and trees and asphalt, and everything requires a physical inspection to determine a formal needs assessment. We'll continue to populate the needs that we have, that we see, that we know need to get done. It's just a matter of whether the board is interested in a formal outside third party doing that physical assessment for us.
Okay, and that determination, we don't necessarily have to decide on before we move forward with the bond. As you
No.
mentioned, Measure I was done after.
Yeah, but in the conversations that we've had about this, for the polling purposes, I don't think we need a formal plan at this point in time, but we need to have some conversation about specific projects and such, because if we're gonna go out and ask the community, we need to, throw some stuff out and get some feedback as to what's, what the yes or no, and, these types of projects are well received and these types of projects are not. So the informal needs assessment that we have now we've been going, I think, is sufficient for the time being for polling, and we can have some more detailed conversations later. If the board is desirous of doing a formal long-term facilities, that would come back later. Obviously, we'd have to approve a contract and everything else and bring that forward.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question related to just sort of the value or the importance of having this resolution. Like, how important is this as we're thinking about what we're messaging to our community moving forward? I looked at some other templates for resolutions that are that are doing the same thing. And I saw language that was really, for example, talking about the reasoning behind why we want to do this. And so I just wondered if anyone else felt like, is that even important? I don't know. And we're also pretty vague, in terms of it's just exploring community readiness to pursue a potential general obligation bond to finance school facilities improvement. Is that okay to be that vague at this point? So those were a couple of my questions.
Yeah. I think it's a good practice for board members to adopt a resolution like this for a number of different reasons. One of the reasons being that the community, I think, generally appreciates transparency. So as Dr. Hayek was mentioning earlier, it's not something that staff and the district is doing outside of the purview of the community members, but rather with the consent of all of the electorate, which is the community itself. That's one for the transparency. And the other is, the resolution is just a direction. It's not a commitment by the board of the school district to call for an election or to seek a bond measure in the next election cycle. It's really just a simple direction, giving guidance and approval to the board to continue on the exploration. So I think it's just a good business practice, if you will, just for transparency purposes so that community is aware that, the school district is starting to think about a bond.
So in other words, you feel this language here is sufficient for what we've
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I do. Because before we ask the community to really vote on the bond, one of the things we will do is come back to you, whether it be in the February meeting or January board meeting or the May or June board meeting, asking for your formal approval to place a bond on the ballot. And so we don't want the community to be caught off guard or surprised at the mention of a bond or talking about a bond discussion at that meeting.
Yeah, I'm just to answer your question, for me, I'm comfortable with this because number A says exactly what he just said. We are just exploring this as an option and gaining interest and to evaluate the feasibility, which is exactly what we're doing.
Thank you. One other question I had was, I know down at the bottom with be it resolved, the number 2 bullet point, we're authorizing a lot of, what can be done moving forward. And so I was curious about that D, seek other such services and activities as deemed relevant. I'm assuming that would be something that if you were seeking out something other than what's already been included in here, you would come back to the board to talk to us about it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, it's just, we can't engage in conversations unless you tell us. Because we can't be seen as doing anything, without you're the elected body and making a decision, and this is affecting taxpayers. A lot of this stuff is gonna happen behind the scenes after today. So once there's discussions and conversations going on, if there's no formal recognition by the board of doing this, then it's gonna bring into question is like why and what's going on, and did the board talk about it? And so that's the reason for this. Anything that we do, I mean, there are proposed agreements on the next two action items. So anything related to this requiring a formal agreement and a cost and expense will come back to the board for approval.
And I do think that we have to, when we look at such number 2, realize we're working as a team. And this isn't the district coming to the board saying we need to do this, and this is certainly not the board coming to the district to say we need to do this. This has to be a team effort, and I think that that's what this resolution outlines, is we're not gonna overstep our responsibilities and take on anything that's the board's unaware of or has no knowledge of. We will bring everything back to the board to take formal steps so that everything's lockstep as we work as a team.
Excellent. Thank you so much, both of you. Any more questions, comments, or are we ready to move on to vote? Okay, seeing none, we will vote. Trustee Kearns.
Yes.
Trustee Gill.
Yes.
Trustee Gorback.
Yes.
Trustee Goldberg.
Yes.
Trustee Sylvester.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Motion carries 5-0 with a preferential yes vote from Trustee Kearns. We're now at 3B, review of proposals for bond polling services. We're not going to have a motion first. At first, we're going to have Dr. Hayek present the proposals, I believe.
If you want, I can go through the formal proposals, but essentially, we had asked for 2 companies to give us a proposal to do polling services. They're both have a very positive reputation. I think our guests here today have worked with both of them. So it's a matter of board choice of which one that the board prefers to use, if any, if you want to move forward with the polling services. I'd say one of the differentiating factors is True North will come in person and present to the board, and I believe Godby would prefer to do it remote if a presentation is requested by the board. Essentially, the parameters and the procedures between both of the companies are very, very similar. It's just a preference of which company that the board would want to use, if any.
So to me, that's an important distinction between the two, is the willingness to come to here versus, is that a cost factor also? Does one Godby, are they saying a lower cost because they're not coming here, or is
No,
that
I don't think the cost is predicated on whether or not there's a formal presentation. I think some of the feedback we got was not every board requests a formal presentation of a poll.
Okay.
Couple questions. Godby was the one who did the surveying in 2014, which is obviously a while ago. True North has had more recent experience with some of our more local LVUSD, as well as the city of TO and the city of Westlake Village. Has there been any attempt or need to check with any of those entities, kind of check references and see what the experience was of these more recent endeavors?
We haven't formally asked for references. We can if that's what the board wants us to do.
Okay, that might make some sense. I mean, just to give my take on looking at the two, what I didn't like about the Godby resolution was this kind of like spreadsheet of choices. You know, if you want 400 respondents, it's this price. If you want 600, it's this price. If you want this number of minutes. I kind of preferred the True North. We believe it's 500, or at least 500 is a good amount, and here is the typical survey time frame. So just for me personally, that resonated positively with me. The fact that it's a small two-person firm and you know who you're going to get, and it's going to be the principals who largely or who only work on this, that also is important to me as well. But it would be interesting to just kind of loop through some of our local community members to see what their particular experience was, if it was positive. I know, like for LVUSD, there was a positive result. The bond got passed, but just what their experience working with the company was like.
We can do that on the back end and the procedural wise, but not to throw it back in your court, but I think maybe elected board member or council to elected person, I think the view that you have of what was presented to you is, maybe different than, or similar to what the back end working is. So we can talk about the administrative stuff and say how was the working relationship, but as far as how the finished product was viewed, I think the elected body is probably a good resource if that's what you're interested in.
Fair point.
Trustee Goldberg?
I think it's both, actually, for me personally, because I had a similar reaction to Trustee Sylvester. Just looking at the proposals, I liked that we used them successfully in the past, but True North just said, I understand this community. The proposal looked like, I get this place, and so for me, I also lean toward True North if the experience, both of the electeds, I guess, but and of the staff who are doing the actual work, bear out. So I don't know how you make a motion.
Well, we had
or
some,
something along those lines.
we had a conference call, and Jen and I have talked a few times on this, and I mean, there's positive working relationships with both of the companies. There's nothing negative. If there was anything negative that came out in our conversations or preliminary research, we wouldn't have brought it forward. But as far as the back end working of it, Jen and Jared would be the ones, working with them pretty closely through us, with us. But it was positive, and they've worked with both of the companies in a positive nature. Now, the working relationship isn't determined on whether the bond passed or not. You can still have a positive working relationship, and then the bond doesn't pass. So that's why I think there's a front end, back end type of thing with it. And Jen, if you want to,
Sure.
go ahead, feel free.
Sure. So as you mentioned, Trustee Goldberg, yeah, True North did perform the survey for Las Virgenes Unified School District, and the district had a very favorable view of the services that were provided by Dr. McClarney at True North, and they're very pleased. And True North also did a number of different surveys in this past November election, where there were about 240 school districts that elected to put a bond on the ballot, and True North did a lion's share of many of the survey results in the Southern California region, from Los Angeles County, Orange County, San Diego, as well as Ventura County. So I thought I'd just share that information with you.
And just a follow-up, if we are going out for recommendations or I guess a check on their relationship, we would need to table this item for another board meeting. So just know the timeline and timeframe of where we're at.
Was there a comment from Trustee Kern?
Yes, just briefly, as someone who's done research similar to this over the past year, I'm definitely very sensitive to how presenting it is extremely important. And so for that reason, I think True North's ability to come here in person is extremely important. And also just looking at their proposal, it seems like they have everything just kind of staged out really well, as opposed to Godby's giving us multiple options in like a spreadsheet. True North has it very laid out on a particular slide and has all of the different check boxes that I'm looking for when I'm doing like statistical research and doing surveys. So for that reason, I would definitely tend to go towards True North, but I would like to see their local relationships in the community for sure, and how those have been built.
Thank you for that. So I also, after reviewing the proposals, was leaning toward True North for some of the reasons already mentioned by my colleagues. So do we feel like we would need to get some sort of, like, more confirmation that they would be great to work with before moving on to making a motion to choose and move forward with the contract. Yes.
I think most of us have expressed already a preference for, I don't know whether, one over the other. I don't know whether we would need to reach out and see other, I mean, I would say we can call for the question.
I mean, hearing from both of you that you have had and have heard of the positive working relationship, I don't want to hold this process up. I think Dr. McLaughlin's point was a fair one. To me, going through both proposals, True North clearly was the winner, and learning now that they were willing to come in person kind of solidifies it. Hearing that they've had positive, in your views, and I do know they tout a 93% success rate, and that's over, I mean, their pages of references went on and on and on. So I don't think at this time doing any further checking of references is needed.
Would somebody like to make a motion? Yes.
I move that we approve True North's application? Proposal?
I'll second.
Okay. Was that a sufficient motion? That we're accepting their proposal? What did you say?
Do
You
you
said
need to-
accepting their proposal?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you need to say to enter into
Enter
a
into a
contract?
contract? Do we need more specific?
Accepting their proposal and moving on to a contract.
I will second that again.
Okay, we've decided that's fine. Thank you. Let's vote. Trustee Kearns.
Yes.
Trustee Gill.
Yes.
Trustee Gorbach.
Yes.
Trustee Goldberg.
Yes.
Trustee Sylvester.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Motion carries 5-0 with a preferential yes vote from Trustee Kearns. 3C, I believe we're also handing this over to Dr. Hayek first in terms of a proposal for bond consulting services and potentially making a decision to enter into a contract.
Yes, you've seen the presentation from Mr. Boygan and its team CivX. So they submitted a proposal to provide services to the district and to the board. Going over the presentation that's attached here in the proposal was the one that went over earlier to help the district and the board with the steps moving forward with the process to work with the pollster and then be the conduit between the pollster and the administration and provide us some feedback recommendations. And if approved, we'll enter into an agreement with them.
Thank you. Any questions? I guess I think my question going through this, and some of this was really clearly explained in the presentation by Mr. Boygan on the process, but it really, I think when going through it really felt like this fall work, which is really the survey polling work, it felt, and I understand the need for our consultant to want to be working with the polling company, but it felt like a lot of this, the focus in the fall is the poll, and it just felt like maybe there's a lot of overlap there in terms of what we're expending to pay for these services. So I just wanted to put that out there as maybe a question, or if anybody had thoughts on that.
I mean, I think actually having them work together from the beginning makes tremendous amount of sense. We're not talking on a monthly basis that much money, so I think having them embedded from the start, I think, is the most effective.
Also, it functions as a project manager almost.
Yeah, I think in the past, I think what happened in 2014, and tell me if I'm wrong, was I think we actually we really went with the consultant initially, and then there was like more of like a subcontract with the pollsters, I think, through you, right? Is that how it worked? Okay. So I know this is structured a little bit differently, so I just wanted to put that out there as a question. So if nobody else has any concerns with that? Okay. Any other questions, issues? Okay, I think we're ready for a vote, or a motion first. Who would like to-
President Powell,
Thank you, Trustee Goldberg.
I move that we approve and enter into a contract with Team Civic X as submitted.
I'll second.
Thank you. No other comments? We will vote. Trustee Kearns.
Yes.
Trustee Gill.
Yes.
Trustee Gorback.
Yes.
Trustee Goldberg.
Yes.
Trustee Sylvester.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Motion carries 5-0 with a preferential yes vote from Trustee Kearns. And with that, we are at Section 4 adjournment. Seeing no other agenda items, we are adjourned at 10:55 a.m. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you both.